The lily requires 8 pieces of steel. There's 6 petals. They're made out of 1/8" flat bar. There's a 3/8 round bar for the stem, and then there's a 1/4" round bar that are used for the stamens. So the lily has 6 petals in 2 layers of 3, and I'm using 1/8 by 1.5" flat bar for the petals. And the ends are cut at 45 degrees, so it's about 6 inches from point to point. And that's adequate for this flower. So in the gas forge I can work 3 petals at a time. That speeds the process up tremendously. So my first step is I'm going to knock that top corner into the bar. And as you can see, the flat bar wants to warp and twist and move all around on you. So a couple strokes to flatten it out. You'll see this repeated on the 3 bars. Drive the top in, and then next what I'm doing is moving that tip down to the center of the bar, which you see right here. And if the bar is hot enough, a few taps should bring it into center. And then that allows me to switch ends. So you can see if you had a lot of flowers of this style to do, you suddenly do a lot of repetition work. And that can work out fine. You can get into sort of a production run and do a whole series of exactly the same points, switch around, do the next set, do the next set. So again, pointing. You want to have good tongs for this. I'm using a box jaw pair of tongs because I'm doing a lot of work on the edge of the petal. And I actually chose a slightly small pair. I should have gone to the next size up. So this is the second end of this petal being formed and worked. You should get sort of a lensoid shape. So now I'm using the cross peen, and it's a fairly heavy hammer, a fairly dull cross peen as well. And I'm working along the edges in the center of the bar, so it almost produces an oval shape. So I'm really stretching those edges out a fair ways. Again, thin metal moves fairly quickly. You can see the texture on there. And I'm not worrying about doing the end that the tongs are holding. That will be welded to the stem, so there's no reason that I have to texture it. And again, you can see some of the texture there. You do this on all 6 petals. Try and create a fairly even pattern on all of them, and then they can be joined and welded to the stem. So I usually take about 2 heats per petal to get enough width and enough texture developed into it. And you can see I'm rotating the petal to follow the outline of it. Again, each flower you do, you're going to alter the texture on it to suit your particular application. If I was using a sharp cross peen, you get a deeper dent, but you get more like a line or a striation on the petal. Again, this is up to personal interpretation. You can do it whichever way you want. it's the final look that you're after. I find the blunt cross peen works very well for this. So although you haven't seen it in the video, I've done 6 of these now. This is the third one that you've seen, and that's our finished look. So that end hasn't been done, is not textured, and what I'm doing now is I'm going to bend 3 of them at 90 degrees and 3 of them at 45 degrees. So there's 45, just over the horn. And this makes it easier to position when I weld it. That's the only reason I'm doing this now. And that one, 90 degrees. The 90-degree ones go on the bottom when you weld it. So you end up welding the 45s first. So the stamens are the 1/4-inch round rod, and that's using the shouldering tool to create a shoulder back about 1/4 of an inch from the bar, and then that little tiny knob on the end, I'll work with the hammer a little bit to create roughly a round shape. And again, you can be as fussy as you want with this. So the shouldering tool is mild steel, made out of some heavy angle iron, some 3/8 flat bar, a couple guides. So this is just tapping it into a really rough, stylized ball shape. And I'll be making 3 of these, and they'll all be slightly different lengths. And drawing out the stem portion of the stamen. And this is just really breaking the mechanical look of the bar, giving it some organic texture. That's what we're looking for, a bit of a taper into the round bit. The stem, this is rough and ready. I'm just hammering that mechanical line, that machine surface, and creating some texture on the outside of the bar, breaking the straight line, some bends in the bar. Really just not a complicated procedure. There you can see, it's just texturing it. So these are the 3 stamens, slightly different length, all made out of 1/4 round bar. And then here they're welded in slightly different positions on the stem. The first layer of the petals welded onto the stem, the second layer of petals welded onto the stem. And now it's the torch work. So it's a little bit important here, your order of operation. You want to actually bend your bottom petals first, and then when you switch to the next layer, you're bending the top petals to rest down on the bottom petals. So there's a fairly tight fit. Now, in the original sample, I've bent the petals way back and I've done a heavy reflex curve on them. I decided not to do on this flower. I changed the position of it a little bit. It's a more open lily, something that's a little bit more recognizable in summer as opposed to later in the season. And the camera throws the look of the torch off a little bit. It's actually, I'm just up at basically a medium orange for bending it. So it's not super hot. I'll do the tips. And again, just using the scrolling pliers, and just pull the tip back a little bit. Give it some flow, some reflex to it. At the end, I will go in and I just warm up the stamens a little bit and separate them maybe a quarter of an inch in the middle, something like that. Just enough optically that it looks like a plant growing. And a lot of times with these flowers, you'll work away on them, and then there's a point you just want to step back and take a look at it and say, oh, maybe I really like that. And it might not be your original pattern. So in this case, it was the leaving the petals further open. I really enjoy the forge work on flowers, but the torch work is interesting. It's almost a meditative state as it warms up, and you're transferring things very small increments, just seeing how it's moving. And then I'm just warming this a little bit close up to the connection point and tipping those petals back just a touch. And you find what looks good and stop. Now the other thing I'm doing here is I'm working the bottom layer first, and then I'll bring the top layer down to match it. So I'm using an oxypropane torch here, and it's a very small one. It's almost a step up from a jeweler's torch. That allows me to get in for fine detail. The propane is nice. It's much cheaper than the acetylene. I can't weld with it, but I can braze and cut with it, and obviously bending as well. Much more economical to run, cleaner to run, easier to get. There's a lot of pluses to running the propane, I find. You do have to change the tip on your torch, and you should change your hoses too, so that it's propane rated hose. Otherwise propane can eat it. And just kind of getting things nearly finished up here. Bottom layer, and then I come in and do the three on the top layer. Same form if you were doing a trillium. You would just decrease the size of the petals on one layer. And the same idea if you were doing an iris, except instead of pointed petals, you would end up with spoon-shaped petals with a point at the connection point at the bottom. And the iris is a little bit different. Instead of just doing a gentle texture on it, you'd really thin out the metal, so you've got lots of waves and lots of contours, and then pull the inner three up to the center and the outer or lower three down, much like the lily in this case. Many variations on the same theme. There. And there's the finished flower on the right and the sample on the left.